And then for those individuals thinking of joining a startup, you better be ready to be passionate about it, because you're going to have to work hard. If you don't work hard on the right things, you're not going to end up succeeding. So pick a company that you're passionate about what they're doing, and founders that will invest in you.
Devon, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to give a little bit of a brief introduction to who you are for our listeners. Founders all over the world are going to be learning from you, people that are making the decision. Should they follow in your footsteps and join an early stage startup, or should they go a little bit more safe and join a well-established company? So a little bit of background as to how I know Devon. So Devon started his career. We had a major decision, like most of the people that we talk to. Graduates from a great university. In his case, he's also quite technical. He's in the Bay Area and has a decision to go in and make. He's got lots of good opportunities. Which one to go in and follow? Should I join a Series A startup, reporting directly and working directly with the CEO and founder? Or do I go a different, more safe route? Devon chose the former. He chose to go into a Series A startup, ReTool, one of the darlings for Sequoia, has been with them from the early stages. And Devon, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you were around employee 20 or so?
Yeah, around the 20s.
And to now be part of ReTool, which is a company having impact all over the world, one of the fastest growing in the entire Sequoia portfolio. And Devon's been there from employee roughly number 20 all the way through this. And how big is go-to-market now?
Oh, go-to-market is well over 100 at this point, and ReTool as a whole is around 350, 375. Like, we're getting up there.
Okay. And so anyway, Devon's story is exactly the story that for those that are going to join a startup, you can follow the lessons that he's going to go in and teach us here. You're going to go and have a lot of success. Founders, what I'd like you to pay attention to is there's some decisions that both Devon was enabled to go in and make, and that the company made that made it to where somebody as talented as Devon can kind of really go in and thrive. So with that, I got to meet Devon a little over a year ago. ReTool was wanting to launch an outbound motion. Got to go and advise them for a while. And what I immediately saw is there's a reason why their go-to-market scaled, and it's because they've been able to go in and hire great people like Devon. So with Devon, what I want to start off with is go back to when you got your degree. So you got your degree, you're graduating. How did you make the decision to go into sales? And how did you pick a Series A startup?
Yeah, well, first off, thank you for the kind words, Dan. That's all very nice. And so when I graduated college, I was a web developer for a small agency here in San Francisco, and I've been doing web development on the side for 4 or 5 years by that point, just through my own individual freelancing and such, and had a portfolio of clients. And so I was sort of keeping that going. I was working with this agency and thinking about, okay, do I want to go and be like a junior engineer at another company? Do I want to go the product route? And I wasn't really thinking about going into sales. I had done some sales with a company called Van Moof, which does electric bicycles, for a few years as well. And so I sort of was like, I don't think I really want to go back that path. But as I was applying for jobs and as I was thinking about where to go, a recruiter actually reached out and said, there's this fast growing startup and we're looking for technical sales folks. We think you could be a really great fit. And at the time, I actually politely declined and said, no, I think I can go this other route. But if there's anything, that of in that space, then I'd love to pick that up. And really fortunately for me, she followed up and said, okay, well, here's the link, check it out. And if you're interested, feel free to reach out. And I don't really remember why, but I opened the website and I looked at ReTool and I said, okay, this looks cool. Like, what is this about? And I remember opening up the product for the first time and starting to drag some components around and starting to get a sense for how it worked and thinking, okay, like there's something cool here. But the real magic moment for me was realizing that there's a lot of these no-code tools out there that get you like some of the way there, but they don't really solve your use cases. There's a lot of low-code tools out there, but again, you're sort of like stuck in a box and you usually have to learn their language and things like that. But with ReTool, the real unlock for me was I could just write using JavaScript. I didn't have to learn some native language. And then B, like I wasn't stuck in the box. Like if there was a component that ReTool didn't have, if there was a connector we didn't have, you could just build it on your own. And so you were able to use everything that was in the box when it was valuable. And then when it wasn't, you were able to go and create your own custom things. And so I sort of groveled my way back and said, I would really love to meet with the team and chat with some folks. And luckily for me, she set me up with some interviews and I got to meet with a lot of the early team. I realized very quickly everyone was super passionate, but also just really grounded. Nobody was overhyped. They weren't trying to sell this idea of why ReTool was great. It was just really natural why ReTool was great. And then, of course, getting to talk with David, get his vision for what ReTool was going to be and what it had been so far and how he wanted to run the business. really just sold me. And I figured, I would do any job so long as I get to work here. And so I got really lucky, and they brought me onto the team around July of 2020.
Okay, so I'm going to do a brief summary on that. So you're technical in nature. Initially, the idea of sales, not super appealing. Then you go in an outbound approach. So they reach out to you instead of waiting for you to come to them. Then, because of that, you're like, I'll at least take a look at it, even though you decline. Product seems interesting. Walk us through the interview process, though. So how long did it take from when you said, you know what, yeah, I'll talk with you, until an offer was in your hand?
Oh, I want to say it was probably 2 to 3 weeks. It was pretty fast, but I met with a lot of people. So at the time, I think what ReTool did really right was we had a couple people who were really focused on sales for ReTool, but again, around 20 employees, it was quite small. They didn't restrict the interview process just to the sales team. So I was also talking with folks who were on the engineering team, who were on the product side, who were thinking about design. I got to talk with someone from our support team. And so they really took a whole smattering of folks from all around the business to make these decisions. And so I met with well over half the company by the time I had an offer in hand, and also was able to connect with other folks just via LinkedIn and by email to start to talk to them about their experiences. And so the decision was made in sort of a cohorted way, even though there was one hiring manager for the role.
Okay.
And so that was the process there.
What was the longest you waited in between rounds? So you go in, you have a conversation with over the phone or in person. How quick were they to respond to let you know, hey, we're interested in the next thing? Or did they even do it during the interviews?
Yeah, I don't quite recall any delay really. There was a lot of, I was given next steps at the end of each interview. So I was told, this is where you're going to go next. There was a few days of back-to-backs. So where I would have like several interviews just all stacked on top of each other. But there wasn't necessarily like any significant delay. And another piece I think ReTool did really well back then was, so the recruiter that reached out to me was actually external. We had contracted an organization to go and find people to bring into process. But then our head of recruiting at the time, who's still here and still leads recruiting at ReTool, Amanda Bell, she is just phenomenal and really made the process seamless and really focused on the fact that you just need that good candidate experience when you're bringing in folks.
Yeah.
At no point did I feel, again, like ReTool was selling me. In fact, I felt like I really was showing myself and really eager to be there. They knew what they had and they held it very well. But she made the whole process just so seamless, so smooth from the take-home assignment through to the actual interviews themselves. And so that went incredibly well.
And so would you say, compared to any other company that either you interviewed with or that you've heard about, they were disproportionately respectful of your time? At the end of each interview, to already tell you, here's the next step.
Oh,
My guess is when you're interviewing, that wasn't common.
No, absolutely not. Usually you get the close to the chest, like, okay, we'll follow up sometime the next couple business days and blah, blah, blah. If you have any questions, let us know. And then also a lot of interviews feel very canned. There's a lot of books on how to ace interviews and things like that, because most companies, they just will ask you the same static questions every single time. And sure, like ReTool asked me things about like my background and my career and things like that. But a lot of the questions would flow pretty naturally with the conversation that we were having at the time. And we're really focused on problems ReTool was experiencing in the current moment and how my technical skills would line up and how my communication skills would line up and things like that. And so I never walked away from an interview thinking, that was really dry or, that person was disinterested. It genuinely felt like they were looking for a good candidate. And again, I don't necessarily feel like I deserved to get to be here early on, but I was really appreciative that they brought me on.
Okay. So you stand out in the interview process. They're excited. They extend an offer. Walk us through what you did, either that went really well or that went horribly in the first 90 days. So, because again, there's a total of 20 employees. It's not like there's 20 in go to market. They don't have a ton of process, my guess is. So what did you do that stood out? And maybe what are some lessons that you learned? Like if I were to repeat that first 90 days, I would do more of this and less of this.
Yeah, I would say probably the mistake I made was I tried to be a little too academic early on. So I found our wikis, I found the ReTool docs, I found the ReTool community, and I just tried to read as much as I possibly could. I remember going through our docs front to back probably 2 to 3 times over the course of the first couple months. Thinking like, this is how I'm going to absorb this product. And with something like ReTool, it's so broad. It's a way to build software, right? And so when you think about our docs, it's not like you're going to read the docs and then be able to do everything. You have a use case, you have something you're trying to solve, and you're going to go to the docs specifically for the areas you need to solve that use case. And then
Yeah.
you're going to apply those in that moment. And so I think I wasted a ton of time trying to be super academic and trying to just read a bunch and thinking that that was going to get me far. And the real pivot there was, it was probably, less than a month into the role. My initial role at ReTool was as what we called a technical SDR, that has now since become our associate sales engineering team. And what we basically do is we engage with everyone who signs up for the product or engages with us in some way. And at the time, we already had Salesforce somewhat implemented, but the process was just horribly slow, where you would get a new lead and you would go and you'd have to then open up LinkedIn, and now you're opening up an enrichment tool and you're going through and you're trying to find research on them. And so by the time you actually reach out to somebody, it's been like 15, 20 minutes since they signed up, and they probably are either deep in the product now, or they've decided, maybe it's not going to work out, or maybe they hit a point of friction or things like that. And so one of the biggest learnings I ended up having was I just went and built a ReTool app to solve this problem. And so I was able to go and connect to our Salesforce and all of these enrichment tools and all of these other, I wrote a bunch of functions that did a few little silly things for me, like figured out how many business days were left in the month, or were able to dynamically figure out someone's LinkedIn profile. And this dashboard ended up making it so that, every single person who signed up, we were able to engage with within a couple minutes. And so as we've scaled, that dashboard still exists. In fact, I have a to-do list item to make a few updates to it later today. It's what it allowed us to do is a lot of companies in their inbound motion, they'll reach this point where they just can't do that kind of personalization at scale anymore. They have to start automating more. They have to start being more generic. We still have not hit that. And we have fairly broad criteria on who we talk to. And we're able to talk to a lot of people in a highly personalized way just because we're able to go through all those. So that long ramble was all really to say that what I learned a lot more from was being more hands-on with the product, just actually solving a problem that we had versus trying to be academic, versus trying to just read a bunch and thinking that that was going to somehow impact the business, when in fact, nobody cares what you know if you're not actually applying it. So that all came handy.
So if you go and you take that, the one thing that was core to your success in the first 90 days is a mastery of the product. You started off academically, but then you got real dangerous when you actually started using the technology and forcing yourself to become a real customer using it. Then you could talk to other reps, you could talk to clients, anybody.
Absolutely. Yeah, it comes so in handy because a large part of the reason why we hire a lot of people with engineering backgrounds on our sales team is they have that empathy for what it's like to build software, and they understand the friction and the challenges that people go through in a really intimate way. And so being able to not only have that background, but then also be able to know how ReTool was actually more helpful or more valuable to build software. That allowed me in conversations with customers to be able to empathize with what they're doing a lot more. And then also it just pushes the product forward more. Like you have to dog food your own product, especially early on. And you have to understand the areas where there is a bug and there is a point of friction and there is a feature that you lack. And so being able to see those things firsthand, to be able to talk to the engineering team directly and say like, here's a recording, here's what I tried to do, it's completely broken, like we need to fix this. That goes an incredibly long way. And again, I think we still today have, and at the time had, just a really down-to-earth team that just cares about building great software. And so we're able to have that sort of direct kind of communication of, I saw this is what I experienced, we should fix this. And then we can have opinions on our roadmap and things like that. It often aligns pretty well. And so we're able to have really quick feedback cycles.
So if you go and you look at, let's say your overall first year that you were there, what type of relationships did you build at the executive level, engineering level, that to this day are still kind of are core to why you're doing well and why ReTool's doing well? Talk to me about the access to people that you had, relationships that you built, and how that impacted you in your first year. And start there.
Totally. Yeah. So I would say early on, especially because there's so much going on, there's so much to solve, there's so many challenges and problems and things that you're fixing, you don't really realize you're building relationships. You're sort of just like working, and you sit down and try to solve a problem and you're talking to someone, and every once in a while you'll get to just like chat around about what things are going on in someone's life and things like that, and pick up little pieces here and there. But for the most part, you're just working together, and I think you learn a lot about people when you see how they work, especially in that kind of environment. You also learn a lot about people's egos. I mean, if you're working on a collaborative project and somebody is trying to take the credits and they're trying to get their name all over it, then that's usually a pretty bad sign. And it's usually pretty telling of the kind of person they are. And that was another thing that stood out to me at ReTool, is nobody tried to take credit for anything. It was like, if we solved the problem, we solved the problem, great, like move on to the next thing and let's keep going. And there wasn't this culture of, I need to be the one to say I built this feature, or I need to be the one that built this strategy out. It was just, if we solved it, that's fantastic. If it failed, let's go back and try to do it again. So I think early on, I developed a lot of relationships there. I also think a lot of people put a lot of, time and effort into me. I believe I was the youngest person at ReTool for something like my first year and a half or 2 years
Yeah.
here. And there's just so many warm people who had past experience in industry, had previous roles that were similar, who would coach me along and were really patient and were willing to put in that investment. And so a lot of relationships developed out of those pieces. And yeah, I think when it comes to communication barriers, I think a lot of my friends at other companies, they've talked about how their executive team can be really hoity-toity and like blocked off and corner office with the door closed types. And David, Anthony, the rest of our staff team have just never been that way. They are really open. They're always walking around talking to folks. And it never really felt like they were on some pedestal or on some other level. They were always just down in the trenches solving things with us, even to this day.
Yeah.
Even today, you still see David walking around, meeting with engineers, meeting with sales folks, talking to them about the things that are going on, helping by hopping on calls, things like that. And so we've never really had those restrictions. And if you want to go talk to somebody, you can. And I think what that culture ends up breeding is a lot of respect for people's time, right? Nobody's going to go and message David and be like, I just want to go on a coffee walk just to like chit chat with you for 30 minutes. Instead, it's like, no, like if you have access and you have access, you're going to make the most of that and you're going to have a meaningful conversation, and you're going to be respectful of people's time. So it's always been very open, very transparent, and a lot of access to the people you need when you need them.
And I think for everybody to do, just go and internalize, and even myself, as I look back at my time in Qualtrics, one of the best things that comes out of joining an early stage startup, that relationship with the CEO, founders, and executive team, that won't just last while you're there, it lasts a lifetime. And the lessons that you can go in and learn from each other. I just hope people don't take that for granted. I hope they learn from you. When you start off at a startup, get to know the team, get out of your comfort bubble, ask them what they do, and help each other out.
Exactly. Yeah. And you have to do it in such I used to say low ego on interviews a lot when I was describing the team. I eventually learned that low ego usually means like low self-esteem and like not what I was actually getting at. But you sort of have to put your ego and pride at the door and really just care about just helping other people, helping the team, helping the customers. And like, it needs to not come from a place of self-benefits or like getting something out of it. It needs to just come from a place of actually caring about whatever mission you're going after. And if you put all that to the side and you focus on that, then there's a lot of gratification that comes from just solving really good problems.
Okay, so you're going in, you start off, you're taking the inbound funnel, you're working a lot of those deals, you're inventing processes that now have scaled years later. What was the first major career pivot that you had to contemplate? Which could be, should I go back? Should I get a master's degree? Should I go back and become an engineer? Should I go into leadership? What was the first career pivot that you were faced with making a conscious decision on?
Oh, once I got a taste for like working at a real business, I never wanted to go back to school. So that was never something that was on my mind. Probably the first big one was I was doing a lot of sales engineering work while on the SDR team. And again, that's sort of just the nature of having such a small team. And we needed more of those technical resources on calls, running proof of concepts and demos and technical evaluations with customers. And so I was sort of on this track of going towards being a sales engineer, and I sort of figured that was the route I was going to go. But there's a short period of time where I spent quite a bit of time thinking about, do I want to be on the post-sales side? Do I maybe want to go be an account executive? I knew at some point in my career I wanted to manage teams, and not to skip too far ahead, but I eventually did get to do that much younger than I would have anticipated, and it's been incredibly rewarding. Yeah, there was.
Well, let's zone in on that. At what point in your career did leadership start to become, you know what, I'm interested in that? And at what point did you decide, I'm going to take that opportunity?
It was one of those things where, I always had this long view of like, eventually I'll probably manage a team or I'll lead a team. And I didn't really have a really scoped perspective of what part of the business that would look like or what tangibly that would be. I think a lot of people get overhyped and they're like, I want to be the CEO of a big company. I'm not that guy. Like, I do not care about ever having that title. I do not want that title someday. I'm not a huge fan of the idea of going and starting my own thing. But I did know that I really wanted to work within teams and I wanted to lead teams. And so it was always this like scoped or like unscoped, like long view that I had. And it really didn't start to come to light until we started hiring more people. And I was on a lot of interview panels and I was part of onboarding. And I just kept getting the feedback from folks on our leadership team and other folks on the team that like, hey, you should probably like manage this team. You should probably think about doing this. And I think at the time, even still today, I think imposter syndrome sits around and you sort of doubt like,
Yeah.
okay, can I be the one to do that? But I think I sort of brushed it off as like, I don't think I'm ready for this, but eventually maybe. And it wasn't really until there was just a really core business need for somebody to come in and manage the associate sales engineering team that I then got to talk with our head of sales and a few other folks and went to sort of my kitchen cabinet of people and did the pros and cons of like, should I do this and am I the right fit and is this good for the business? That it really just became clear that it was the right move and I'm really happy I made it because it's been really fantastic getting to work with the team.
So a lot of people in sales, if they join, let's call them mid-stage companies or late-stage companies, don't get an opportunity for leadership till maybe 5 to 7 years into their careers. At what point was that you had the opportunity, should you want it?
It was about a year and a half in at ReTool.
So 18 months in, and that's from when you graduated college, or is that from when you started ReTool?
Roughly, yeah. I graduated college in May of 2020. I joined ReTool in July of 2020. And then I was on the inbound team until I believe it was probably around August of 2021. Spent some time on our sales engineering team in like a full dedicated capacity. And then in January of 2022 is when I came in to manage the associate sales engineering team.
Okay, so I know you don't, in all the time that I've got to get to know you, I've never seen you toot your own horn. So I'm going to toot your own horn for a second, and I want you to correct me if anything's off. So you come in, you work harder than most, you master the product, you get to know the team cross-functionally, you have a lot of success. You choose to not stay in a box of this is your job, but instead figure out other scalable processes. And because of that, within 18 months, like, if everybody was like Devon, we'd probably do pretty dang well. We'd like to see him lead. That, without you saying those words, is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that's really kind. I probably want to go that far. I think part of the reason I work hard is I've just been surrounded by people who work incredibly hard at ReTool and are so dedicated and so intelligent. And I really genuinely believe that had I not been surrounded by that environment and also just cared for by so many people in that environment, again, going back to what I said earlier about just the amount of dedication that so many people have put into me at ReTool, I don't think I would have been capable of making that move. And I've seen several people at ReTool in their own respective areas make those kinds of moves where maybe they've been a manager before, maybe they haven't led a team, and they've done that exact same transition where they work incredibly hard and they get really scoped into their area of expertise, and then they end up picking that up. So I think for me at ReTool, that was how our inbound motion should run, which is fairly unique compared to a lot of other tech companies. And being able to really own that area of the business and really deeply understand the ways that we should engage. That's why it made the most sense for me to do that. But I've also seen that in the case of our account executive teams and how they should run and people really stepping up to lead those teams, as well as our sales engineering teams and our post-sales side, not to even mention our entire EPD org and the number of movements that have also occurred there with how we should approach engineering, how we should approach design, how we should approach our product in a way that still is best in class and still follows the principles of really great teams, but also is just uniquely ReTool.
Okay, so ReTool disproportionately works hard. You chose that's going to be part of your own DNA. ReTool disproportionately each person takes on a bit more than a traditional job scope. And you choosing to be part of that enabled you the opportunity to go lead inbound sales.
Yeah, I would say that's fair to say.
Okay, there we are. Okay, so now you're in inbound sales. You're in your first leadership role. And I can't remember, were there any others also leading inbound, or was that you were the sole leader of that?
No, it was just me. So we had myself leading the inbound side, and then we had another manager leading the outbound team. And so him and I worked really closely together as we were spinning up that side of the business and then starting to get our legs under us with what inbound should look like at scale. Because up until that point, it had really only been myself and a couple others who had been in that role. And we never really thought about it in a team capacity. It had always been the individuals who run it. So going into 2022, the question was, okay, how do we actually build a team around this? And how do we take our processes from being individualistic to actually being able to collaborate with each other and actually work in a way that you can scale this out? And so that was a lot of the focus early on coming into that.
So you're 18 months to 2 years into your career. You're given a big remit. How do you end up figuring out the answers? Who were you asking questions to, or was it all trial and error? How'd you figure out how to do it well?
Oh, I was just mentored by so many incredible people. So so our sales development org at the time actually rolled up into our revenue operations team. And so
Okay.
Jonathan Krangle leads our revenue operations team, and he was just an incredible mentor to me. And he had been leading teams for a very long time by that point. And so I was able to go to him with, everything from random wacky ideas I had to insecurities I had to different problems I was having with figuring out how to connect with the team and really establish that rapport. So that was an incredible resource to have. Not to mention all the other great leaders that we have at ReTool who put a lot of time and effort into making sure that I was going to be successful on the leadership team. And then I think another piece that went really well was I had been a part of the hiring process for everyone who had been on the associate sales engineering team at that time and helped onboard them. And I already had those relationships. And probably one of my biggest fears going in was I had that peer-to-peer relationship. And I was a little bit worried that, stepping into the leadership role, now I'm going to be managing these folks, and how's that going to impact the relationships? And I think with each of us individually, we found it in a really clean way, and we were able to still do it in a startup-y way, right? Where there's not any grandeur. It's not the case that, oh, I now have this title and I need to be on a pedestal and again, all hoity-toity. Instead, it's like, no, like I'm a part of this team too. And like, let's all work together and figure this out. And we were able to find those boundaries and really work well together. And I think had it not been for just the caliber of the team that I was coming in to lead, I think it would have been significantly harder to get to where we are now.
Okay. So the team's really selective. You were part of that selection process. And so the transition was easier. Plus, you chose to go in and find anybody that knew what to go in and do, ask for the best advice you could get.
Absolutely.
What would be a false start? Tell us about one false start where you made a decision or you took over somebody else's decision that didn't go well.
Yeah, I think one thing that I juggled with a lot on the associate sales engineering team was the idea of, do we start to expand the team out into non-technical folks and technical folks so that we can, over time have a blend of both on the team? And I think the idea there was this sort of like false caution of, at scale, are we going to be able to still hire engineers and hire technical folks to fill this team when we're thinking about it becoming dozens and dozens and dozens of people? And I think that was a problem. I think the learning from thinking about that was don't create problems that don't exist yet. See if you actually run into that. And so I spent an awful lot of time just considering, should we do that? Should we not? And there were times in the interview process where we would chat with folks who didn't come from a technical background, and you just wouldn't feel it. Like you wouldn't feel the same understanding of developer problems, the same ability to communicate, same ability to demo the product. And so we were sort of trying to shove a square peg through a round hole for a little bit there. And I think a little bit of time was wasted on that. But I would say we still held true to a lot of our principles about hiring just the best people at ReTool and not, taking these big risks. And I feel very strongly about not taking risks with people's careers. And with a decision like that, if I don't feel confident I'm going to be able to support someone, I wouldn't want them to make the decision to join. And so we had a little bit there, I would say. We've also done a bunch on the messaging side. So there have been times where we have tried to move to more automated in certain ways, or we've tried to move more towards things that traditional sales development teams will use. And we just immediately will see a shift in how people engage with us and the level of trust we're able to build. And so I would say those two areas, that's probably two areas that, we had some form of a false start where we sort of went down the wrong path a little bit because we were trying to conform. We were trying to solve problems that didn't actually exist. And we ended up just going back to what we knew at our core and then expanding upon that.
Okay. So don't invent problems that don't exist. Solve the problems you have.
Yes.
And do it quickly. What would you say, like as you go now, I've only got a couple more questions. We're running out of time, but I want to ask one around now that you're is it 4 or 5 years? I can't remember. How many years are you at ReTool now?
Yeah, I'm coming up on 4.
Okay. So as you go into your 4th year, what are the things you're thinking about today as it relates to your career? What's kind of, where's your mind as you're leading an organization now, and to what you want to do with your career?
Yeah, I think the way I've always approached decisions for my career has not been around I need to fill a specific title, or I need to I need to have a certain pay, I need to have a certain seniority, things like that. Like once the basics are taken care of, what's really important to me is just working A, at a company that's solving a problem I care about, and then B, working with a team that I really care about and I'm able to connect and work well with. And so I think as I am approaching thinking about, where does my career go and things like that, I'm very happy with where I'm at. I'm not going anywhere anytime soon, and I love ReTool deeply. And I want to just really make sure that I never become sedentary in that, because I think once you're somewhere for long enough and you've had an impact and you've done really great work, it can get really easy to sort of hang up your towel and think to yourself, okay, like
Yeah.
I've put in my dues and not put in much more. And luckily, everyone at ReTool who's been here for longer than I have and around the same time I have has come nowhere close to doing that, and they're all doing some of their best work still to this day. But that's always something that's top of my mind, is making sure that I'm just still having an impact on the business. And I think if there ever came a day where I just wasn't having an impact on the business, or I wasn't providing the value that I should be, that's probably the time that ReTool should consider, parting ways with me, or I should consider parting ways with ReTool. But I don't foresee that happening. So that's probably the perennial question always on my mind, to sort of boil that down, is like, am I still providing value, and in what way? And am I the best person to do that? And so I think that's something to always strive for.
So, and I think that's something that people actually often miss. They think they either have their own genetic limitations, market limitations, intellectual limitations, whatever they are. And so they're okay with status quo rather than always staying slightly out of their comfort zone. And so if I'm hearing you right, what you're doing is you're consistently holding yourself outside of your comfort zone to make sure you're learning and you're having the impact that actually matters.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that doesn't mean reinventing the wheel. It doesn't mean you should like look and say like, I need to reinvent myself and I need to change everything and I always need to be doing something different. Sometimes it does mean just knowing what you're really good at and really consolidating down to that. But it is always about not getting sedentary, not getting complacent with, this is the work I do and I'm doing it the best way I possibly can, and I'm not going to change anything. You always should be looking for the ways to get better.
Okay, so last question, but it's two-part. What advice would you give to a founder about to go hire their first, let's call it 5 maximum people inside of go-to-market? What advice would you give to them if they've gone from founder sales, now they're going to go hire their first few, either reps, maybe a manager? What advice would you give them?
Yeah, I think it really depends on where the company and the product is currently at. Like if you have a very clear sense of exactly why people are using your product and the problem that you solve, you should definitely bring in somebody who just deeply understands your product to start having those initial conversations, and really just ground them in really core messaging principles, really core customer experience principles. Don't try to do something crazy and build an insanely large process from the get-go. Instead, you should be hiring somebody who has the drive and the stamina to be able to just have dozens and dozens of customer conversations every single week, and is able to communicate the value of the product from what they see it as, and somebody that's able to engage within the product team so that as they're getting that feedback that's super valuable to companies at that stage, you're actually able to action on it. So I think having that person early on is fantastic. And like when I joined ReTool, there was David Dorsky, there was Kent Walters, there was a few others on the team who were exactly that, where you would open up their calendar and from 7 a.m. through 7 p.m., they would be on calls with customers back to back to back. And you would think to yourself, that's a bad customer experience, or they're probably not doing their best work. I was on so many of those calls and watched so many of those calls, and every single customer, they were able to build a really personal relationship, give them the time of day, give them the actual value they needed. And having those experiences then allows you to figure out, okay, what are the problems we actually want to solve on our sales team? Like, do we want to go hire account executives now? Do we want to hire out a sales engineering function? Do we want to go get SDRs because we're not getting enough pipeline? Do we want to go into post sales because we're closing all these customers, but then we can't support them? And you're able to sort of branch off from those people and build out the team in a much more structured way based on your company's problems. versus just, opening some handbook and saying, okay, I'm going to hire an account executive, sales engineer, an SDR, and we're going to take this pod and we're going to rule the world. Because at the end of the day, you probably won't be able to support all three of those functions all at the same time at a brand new company.
Okay, so thoughtful in that first hire. The first hire's got to have enough energy to go in and spend a ton of time with customers, then use that to scale.
Correct.
Okay, same question. What advice would you give to somebody out there right now? They just graduated college. They have less than 2 years experience in sales. Should they or should they not join a Series A startup?
I think the only time you should join a Series A startup is if you really care about what the product is doing or what the company is trying to solve. So it was sort of funny because when I joined ReTool, I never would have considered myself somebody who would have joined like a very early stage company. There's obviously a lot of inherent risk with that. I think ReTool was incredibly unique in that David built us to be a really stable business early on. And didn't care about, all the flashy hype of these massive investment rounds and things like that. Instead, just focused on, okay, we are a business and like we want to make ReTool a stable, sustainable business. And so for me, it was easy to ground in that. And from day one, it felt like we were incredibly stable and has never felt unstable being here.
Okay.
So I would say you look for what stability means to you. And if you see an opportunity where it's a problem you care about, if it's an area, an industry that you care about, and you see that stability, then 100%, like you should just run towards it and take on the opportunity and not care about what team you join or what role you hold, because you'll just get to pick up so much.
Yeah, so words of wisdom there for me, Devon. It matters who you go in and hire for the founders. Go in and hire people that are going to work hard, truly be customer facing. And then for those individuals thinking of joining a startup, you better be ready to be passionate about it because you're going to have to work hard. If you don't work hard on the right things, you're not going to end up succeeding. So pick a company that you're passionate about what they're doing and founders that will invest in you.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's really, at the end of the day, I don't think there's anything special about me. And I don't think people should go in thinking that, they are innately special and they're the one that's going to change the company. I think the only impacts I've had on ReTool are because of the amazing people I've been surrounded by and the care that's been given to me and the really just brilliant people I've gotten to work with on so many things. And any heavy lifting I've been able to do has been largely because of them. And I think that's the perspective anyone going into that kind of company should take is how can I just do the most I can to help the people around me and really hope you're surrounded by really smart people that are going to push you.
Well, I could tell you, I think everybody watching this is going to disagree with you. You're definitely special. But gratitude is also part of what makes you special. You're grateful for a great company and they're grateful for you. So Devon, thank you so much for your time. All of you check out his career. You're going to continue to see great things. Devon's gone from rep, employee roughly number 20 at an early Series A startup to now one of the most successful companies in all of Sequoia's portfolio. A lot of that because of the great work that he's done. And also, as he said, the team is fantastic. When you have a great team you're surrounded by, you tend to win. And so Devon, we appreciate your time. Thank you so much for spending it with us.
Appreciate you as well. Thank you, Dan.